Have you ever gone back and watched a film you shot a couple months back or pulled up an old photo that you used to absolutely love? Now when you open it, you kinda hate it? Well, I've got a few tips and tricks on how you can not feel that way. Let's get into it. Alright, so the reason that I'm making this video is I had gone back and I wanted to make a series of videos kind of breaking down some old films that I had made. And I went and watched a film that we had put together last summer, and I couldn't get through it. To me, it was just super cringy. There were so many little things that I would have changed. Like I would have changed the color grade in some places, just some of the music that we used, how we captured some of the B-roll. And I just got kind of frustrated and really disappointed because I remember when I rendered out that project and sent it to the client, I was super excited, the client was super excited, and it was really well received. But now I'm super disappointed in it. And that's not really healthy, and in reality, I have a process that I use to make sure that that doesn't happen. And so I had to remind myself of this process. So before we get into that process, I kind of want to talk about my relationship with creating. I haven't always been a creator. And in fact, my wife has been a creator far longer than I have. She started playing violin when she was 7 years old, done it all through school, has a bachelor's in violin performance. We lived in Memphis, Tennessee for 2 years, and she got a master's in violin performance. She's played in professional orchestras, she's taught violin, all sorts of stuff. She's been playing for over 2 decades. She's incredible at it. And I remember we shared a room in the little apartment that we lived in, and I would be doing my math homework and she'd be practicing. And no matter how good it sounded to me, it was just never perfect for her. Even if she played every single note exactly how it was in the music, it just wasn't right. You know, like her intonation could have been better or her dynamics could have been better. And there was just this character and this feeling that she could never get just quite right. And I never really understood that because I was a mathematician. I have a bachelor's degree in applied math. I went through I left grad school in my 4th semester to have a master's in applied math. So I grew up with this very rigid understanding of when I got to the end of a math problem, I would put a cute little box around my answer and then I would be done. That was kind of all there was to it. There was no subjectivity, very objective. And then I started taking portraits. So in my grad school, I started taking portraits of all the musicians that my wife knew. They needed headshots and whatever for their websites and for concert posters and all sorts of things. So I started picking up a camera, I got a portrait lens, and I started taking portraits, and I loved it. But there was this small thing with portraits that I started to realize is they were never perfect. I could never get the lighting quite how I wanted to, or the pose wasn't quite right, or maybe like I shot too wide open and so like the tip of their nose was a little soft. There were all these little things that I couldn't get quite right. Even if somebody absolutely loved the photo, there were still things that I could nitpick. And so that's when I learned the difference between objective and subjective perfection. So part of what has helped me progress as a photographer and as a cinematographer is an inability to be satisfied in my work. Those are the things that have pushed me forward. I've seen these flaws and I've strived to correct them. I've strived to get better at lighting or remember to tighten down my aperture a little bit so I'm keeping everything sharp. Those little things, those little imperfections that drove me crazy are what have helped me progress. But in the same note, those things also hold me back because getting too frustrated and getting too cynical and getting too down on my work has started to hold me back in some ways. And you have this crippling imposter syndrome and you don't realize like, hey, I am good at what I do, And so two things have really helped me have a healthy relationship with critiquing my work. And so today we are going to talk about the art of critiquing and the art of finding perfection. All right, far too often, I think I find myself over-critiquing my work, and I can have this negative relationship with critique. And that's not great. And so what tends to happen is I'll get frustrated at my project, and then I'll step away to cool off because I'm frustrated because I feel like I didn't quite catch the audio in the interview that I wanted, or the B-roll wasn't exactly what I was hoping for, or the lighting wasn't quite right, something like that. I'll take a step back from the project to cool off, and then of course I have to come back to the project to get it finished for the client or myself. And then I just come back at the project from a very frustrated headspace. And that's not healthy. Everybody suffers, I suffer, the project suffers, the client suffers. That's not good. But critique is absolutely necessary because every project that I've made and you've made could be better. And so there are two things that I have done to really help me have a healthier relationship with critique. And that's finding a set of people I trust to critique my work. And the most important one, that is defining success before you even start the project. So when it comes to finding people that I trust, I heard this phrase a number of years ago and I've kind of loosely held on to it since then. It's don't take criticism from people that you wouldn't take advice from. And so what I think this phrase is speaking to is find people that you trust to give you critique. Because if somebody watches your film and they just tell you like, I liked it, or I didn't like it, the audio was too loud, that's not really useful information. Because if someone just tells you the audio's too loud, what audio is too loud? Did you just have your headphones turned up too loud? Was the music too loud? Was the dialogue too loud? Were the sound effects too, what does that actually mean? So I think what this phrase speaks to is finding people that you really trust that can give you a good, honest critique of your work. And so those are people that are willing to sit down and watch your film or sit down and look at your photo and drive some nails and kind of poke you and push you to be better, but also lift up the parts that are good. So like someone like this, if they watched your film and they said, I think the audio is really good, but I think your color grade doesn't match the tone of your interviews. Your interviews are really bright and airy and happy, but your color grade is a little dark and muted. What if you did something like changing the colors up and brightening up your color grade? That's something where they've pointed out like hey, there's some good stuff here, but there's these things that don't quite match. And you can make actionable steps on that. And I think it's important to find people you trust. Wounds from a friend, those can be trusted, but just some random person on the internet or YouTube giving you critique on your work, that's not necessarily critique that you can trust. And so when you have people that are willing to watch your work over and over again and are willing to kind of grow with your work so that they can look back and say like, hey, remember that thing you made 2 years ago that was absolutely terrible? Look at where you are now. Look at where your color is now, where your audio is now. Those are the people you want. And for me, these have been people that are actually like really close friends and really, really good people. Some of them are in film and really understand like what I'm doing with the camera and how I'm using the camera as a tool and all of that stuff. But some of them are just like very analytical and very good friends who are willing to sit down and watch 15 minutes of nonsense like this. So finding those people can be absolutely pivotal to starting to have a healthier relationship with critique and keeping yourself out of an echo chamber. So I would say the single most important aspect of critiquing your work is defining success before you even start the project, because you can't really critique something if you didn't know what it was supposed to be. When you render out the final version of a film or you export this portrait or this landscape picture, what was it supposed to be? When you finished it, what was that thing supposed to be? Because if you just render out a film and you're like, here it is, but you didn't set any benchmarks for you to measure yourself by, you're really gonna have a hard time critiquing it. Because if you're like, man, the audio's not good in this, but you had really no intentions of good audio and you didn't set yourself up for success in that way, then that's really an odd measure of critique. And this was an area that I would really struggle in, because I would finish a project and I would watch it back and I'd be like, man, this sucked, and this sucked. This thing was okay, but like all of these other things. But in reality, all of these things over here, like I wasn't even paying attention to them. They were of course something I was considering, but I was really focusing on this thing over here. And I really never made that connection until I really started defining success before I started a project. So how do you define success? Well, it starts by having specific and actionable measures for success. If you just say something like, I want people to like my film, of course, everybody wants everyone to like their film. But if you start by saying, I want to have engaging interviews in this documentary, that is a specific, actionable, and attainable metric for success. So when you say something like, I want to have engaging interviews, that's going to drive your pre-production process. That's going to force you to do pre-interviews, do location scouting, really sit and work through, get a feel of what this person's story is, so you can get a feeling of what questions you want to ask them, and really work on how am I going to sit down with this person and create an engaging interview from this. that's driving your pre-production process and then bleeding into your production process and allowing you to put together engaging interviews. And that was your metric for success. Of course, you're still putting in your normal amount of effort into the rest of the piece. So you're still making sure that you're getting good B-roll and good audio and all of the other components that are gonna make up a good film with your post-production, the rest of your pre-production, everything else. But in this specific instance, you're choosing to put extra effort into creating engaging interviews. And like I said, this allows you to perfect your craft in stages. So instead of taking a project and saying, well, I want really good audio and really good B-roll, I want amazing color, I want great interviews. Instead of saying all of that for one project, you're picking a project and saying, okay, I'm gonna put the same amount of effort into everything else, but interviews, I wanna focus on interviews. So the next project, you've kind of got interviews down, and now you can be like, all right, the color grade, I wanna really focus on the color. And so now you're building your craft up in stages. So defining success and being specific with it in each project has been absolutely pivotal for me progressing and really having a much healthier relationship with critique. So finding people you like and defining success for me have really been keys to having this healthy relationship with critique. So now we got to talk about finding perfection in your work. In this very subjective, very nebulous world of creating and subjective art, how do you find perfection? There's this luminary thinker named Andy Crouch. He is the fellow for theology and culture at the think tank Praxis. He's authored a handful of books. He's a theologian, just an absolutely brilliant mind. And one thing he does, whenever he finishes a book, he gets a copy of it, cracks the book open, just a random spot in the middle of the book, and he just starts reading, and he just enjoys the book. He doesn't critique it. The thing is edited, it's been printed. He just enjoys it. His work is finished. And I think that's beautiful. He's a person who could over critique his work all he wants to, and I'm sure he could find errors and flaws and things that he wants to do better. But he's learned to just sit there, open his book, and enjoy. I think that's beautiful, and I think that's something that we can all learn from. Because all of us, when we create something, whether it be a song or a photo or a film, whenever we put that thing on YouTube or SoundCloud or Instagram or wherever we're putting our work, we put it out there for people to enjoy. So why shouldn't we be the people to enjoy it first? You know, even my earliest attempts at making documentary films, you can find them down low on this page. They're terrible. There's a bunch of things that I would love to change about my earliest films. Like, we shot this film in this bowling alley, and there's just so many things about it that I would change. And you know, I watch it back now, and there's parts of it that are just laughable. They're so bad. You know, but there's people. We were able to capture a community of bowlers that have been around for 50 years. And within the last 2 years, that bowling alley is under new ownership, and a lot of that community is gone. Like, people that were running that kitchen who had been there for like 48 years.
Must be 40 years now. I know. I always joke around and tell people I started when I was 10.
And they are so thankful that we made that film because they have something to remember that by. And I think that is beautiful. I think that's absolutely wonderful. And so I can sit back and enjoy that. So how do you find perfection? And I think it starts with just that. It starts with enjoying your work. So to really help myself enjoy my projects more, I've done just exactly what Andy Crouch does. When I finish something, I'll open it up, I'll just drop my play at somewhere in the middle, I'll sit back and I'll just enjoy it. I'll enjoy the sound and the sound effects we use and the color grade and the people that we got to interact with. And I'll remember getting to interview them and all these beautiful things that were a part of this project. I just take the time to enjoy it, knowing that of course there's things that I wish I would have done better, but just enjoy the thing. You finish it, all that hard work that you and your team put into this thing, you now get to release it and people get to enjoy it. You created something, it's the work of your hands. Just take a second, enjoy it. So, and the other thing, the final thing, and this goes back to defining success, is you have to ask yourself, how did you define success? And this was my pitfall with the project I mentioned at the beginning of this video. So I watched it back and I became really frustrated because there were a bunch of things I would have changed, but I have to look back and ask myself, how did I define success? Because the project I was talking about with engaging interviews, right? So that was our Prison Blues documentary. It won a couple of awards. Great film. And our goal with that film was to have engaging interviews. And we did a pretty good job at that. We did tons of pre-interviews with people. We had quite a few interviews in that documentary. And so I look back at that piece and there's some footage that I wish I would change, and I wish we would have done the audio levels differently, but we had really good interviews and I was really happy with the interviews in that film. Of course, now I think I would have done the interviews differently and I think I could do them better now than I did back then, but that's all part of the process. You can't be anachronistic. You can't look at yourself now and try and apply that to yourself back then, because that's not who you are. So how did you define success for the project? If it was to have good B-roll and you watch back your film and it has great B-roll, like praise that, like be excited about that, because that is how you define success. Moving out of mathematics and moving into something creative where I don't get to put a neat little box around a video when I'm done with it and say, this is perfection, this is the objective right answer, where I've got to be subjective. Just teaching myself and learning how to enjoy my work, and then looking at how I define success for a project. Those are the two things that have really helped me create some sort of box to put around a piece. Creating anything is a process. It's subjective. There's always going to be people that like your work. There's always going to be people that hate your work. That's just the way it's gonna be. And so for you, having a healthy relationship with critique and finding perfection and finding enjoyment and gratification and purpose in your work, that is what's super important. And so I hope some of these tips of, defining success, finding people that you can trust, and just enjoying your work, I hope these things have helped you have a better relationship with critique and help you grow your work and grow your work in healthy stages, because we got to keep creating. We got to keep releasing things, because there's people out there that want to enjoy them. So until next time, I'm going to start working on this series of breaking down previous videos that I've shot and kind of talking about them and how I work on critiquing my videos and building up from there. So if you got any questions or comments, leave them down in the comments below. I will happily answer any questions you guys have. But until next time, thank you.